So you want to read more. You're not alone. A lot of people want to read more, myself included. It seems like a lot of us want to read. We love the idea of it, of having a book on the go, of learning something, of being a little more thoughtful, a little more focused with our time, a little more intentional with our life. But it's not always easy to follow through. And based on admittedly anecdotal experience, when people talk about why they don't read more, the same things seem to keep coming up again and again. The main ones are time, focus, and attention span. I think it feels very hard to sit down and actually begin reading. It's that initial investment of energy that is so hard for a lot of us to get over. But here's the strange thing. Have you ever noticed you pick up a book, you read a page, 2 pages, and you felt tired and you kind of wanted to put it down, but you persisted. And then you continued and you're 50 pages in, 60 pages, and you didn't even seem to notice it. The difference isn't about the book. It's about what happens at the very beginning. Sometimes you put down the book after 2 pages and sometimes you keep going. There's this concept in physics that most people will be very familiar with called inertia. But just to simplify, inertia is the tendency of an object to stay at rest if it's at rest or to continue in motion if it's in motion. The same is true with your attention, right? If you sit down to read and your mind isn't already kind of primed or ready to read, empty and maybe not empty, but clear and ready in the right state of mind for reading, if it's scattered, if it's all over the place, it's holding on to messages and thoughts and distractions, unfinished tasks, things that you have to do, you might find it challenging because reading already has what's called, what we might consider activation energy, right? That initial effort that's required to begin. And if you're still clinging on to a lot of these other ideas, it feels very challenging to get through that first hump of energy, that first activation energy. Now you see this everywhere, right? This isn't just true for reading. If you're going to the gym, the hardest part isn't the workout. As a lot of people will tell you, it's putting on shoes, it's getting to the door, it's actually going to the gym in the first place, right? To doing focused work, the hardest part isn't the work itself, it's opening a document, it's starting to work on it and giving yourself patterns and productivity hacks or productivity schedules or abilities. And the same is true with writing. I mean, it's sitting down in front of the blank page and actually putting words. That's the hardest part. Reading is no different, right? The hardest part of reading isn't the reading, it's the starting. And this matters more than it might seem on the surface because reading isn't just a pastime, right? There's a lot of evidence pointing in the same direction that people who read for pleasure regularly tend to report all sorts of greater successes in life, higher life satisfaction, better mental health. They often perform better in terms of income, opportunity in life, and you see this really all across the board. A lot of the most successful people attribute reading as the number one reason why they are successful in the first place. And cognitively, of course, reading engages multiple parts of the brain. It's super comprehensive what it does. It supports memory, it supports your overall cognition, reading comprehension, of course, lowering the risk of cognitive decline later on. So this is a very high value habit. But it does have a starting cost, like every other high value habit. And this is where most people get stuck. A lot of people don't dislike reading. They dislike the first 5 minutes of reading, right? And it's really getting beyond those first 5 minutes that the joy of reading becomes just unstoppable. Once the inertia is going, once the momentum is going, it's hard not to be hooked by reading. Because once you get past that initial resistance, your attention settles, the distractions fade. The book, whether it's an idea, it's a story, it's a voice, it's a character, something will hook you and it will start to carry you into that world of flow state. Now, probably you've been there before, right? At some point, you've been in what psychologists describe as this flow state where energy, it just seems to flow and effort it goes away, right? It seems effortless. You feel momentum. You're no longer pushing through. This happens with reading all the time, but it takes effort to get there, right? You have to get inside that book. And if you repeat this often enough, the good news is that the inertia flips, right? Instead of it being very challenging, it's a bit of a slog to get into reading, and then once in a while you break through the clouds and you achieve this, amazing moment of flow state. Your prime is the flow state. Your homeostasis is the flow state, right? Instead of resisting reading, your mind starts to expect it, right? It becomes easier, it becomes a habit. And not reading makes you feel a little bit off rather than reading. The same thing people often talk about with going to the gym. So the problem is in the beginning. The solution is to make the beginning easier, because if the problem is that you're finding it challenging to get into reading, you have to find ways to make getting into reading almost effortless. So here are a few simple ways we can do that. First, we could lower the threshold. A lot of times, I think we want to aim for a big goal. I want to read for an hour, I want to read for 2 hours, whatever. Let's not aim for an hour at the beginning. Let's aim for 5 minutes. Let's aim for 10 minutes, right? Building endurance, getting past that initial resistance. The second is to make the reading just easy, right? To make it obvious that you need to read. For me, what I find works is leaving books right next to my bedstand, right? Or maybe a book that you really want to read, leaving it in a prominent place where you're going to notice it on a desk, pillow, a chair, something like that. And make it so you can't really avoid it. A third thing you could do is pair the habit with something else. This is something James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits, which is a great book, by the way. If you did want a book recommendation here, nonfiction, of course, but that's one I can highly recommend. Let's say after your morning coffee, just before you go to bed, right after brushing your teeth, whatever it is, attach it to a habit that already exists. Another thing that I think works really well is to choose a book specifically that pulls you in. Some books are automatically going to reduce the inertia for you because they're just the kind of book that you would love to read naturally. They have that momentum built in for you, right? So as an example for me, over the last few months, I read 4 books that really gripped me immediately. True Grit has this voice that just grabbed me. I loved it. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer was so fun, moved quick, naturally. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was because I was always heard that it's not as good as Huck Finn, but honestly, in its own way, it was so entertaining, and I liked it, in many ways similarly. You don't need to fight your way into it, right? Finally, don't judge the first few minutes of your reading and think that that's going to represent your experience reading. The beginning is not what reading is. It's the entry fee. It's what you have to pay in order to become a reader. So if you want to get into reading and you're finding that reading is naturally difficult, the truth is you're wrong. Reading is not naturally difficult. Starting is naturally difficult. Whether you're starting to read, whether you're starting to run, whether you're starting anything else you've been successful in your life. Think about what it was like at the very beginning. And remember, that's what it might feel like with reading as well. Once you understand that, you stop asking whether you feel like reading, and you start just finding ways to give yourself the time, to give yourself the framework so that you can get past the part that isn't fun, the part that isn't the point. And for those of you who already are in habits of reading, more power to you guys. This is amazing. Continue on, but hopefully some of these ideas are helpful. Maybe some of the things that you agreed with, some things that you disagreed with. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. I'd love to hear the perspective of people who are just starting to read or would love to get into reading as well. And as always, I hope that you guys really got value out of this video. And if you did, I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe, and hope that you guys have a fantastic remainder of your day. Take care.